This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Welcome, fellow sewing enthusiasts. I'm Lydia, and I know what you're thinking.
Why should I listen to this girl when it comes to sewing efficiency and sewing faster?
Well, I don't mention this often, but I do have a Bachelor of Design focused on fashion studies. After my education, I worked in the fashion industry until now, so I have a few tricks up my sleeve. Today I'm gonna let you in on a few of those juicy tips. So I hope you guys enjoy. Let's get into it. I've got my notes and we're ready to go. The most important thing you can start with is cutting, fusing, and pre-pressing and gathering all of your notions the day before or another day than sewing. Just get all of that out of the way. That step can be kind of draining, and we don't want to be drained when we start sewing. Am I right? When I do my sewing challenges where I sew multiple garments in one day, I do all the cutting a whole other day, okay? Lately, I've been getting a little lazy in those challenges. I forgot that I didn't cut certain things, and I had to cut in the middle or I had to recut pieces, and that really disrupts your workflow. So make sure that you just cut, pre-press, pre-fuse, gather your notions. That's what we want to do here, people. Also, using a cutting mat and rotary blade can sometimes cut down a lot on cutting time. So do try that out. Wind extra bobbins. Believe me, you do not want to be stopping your work. It's a waste of time. Let's leave that to those who want to be miserable and exasperated. Set up your machine, set up your space. Makes your sewing room a happy place. This seems intuitive, but how many times have I started a project and not fully set up my space? And then I'm looking for that one tool that I left in a random place that I really need, and I am disrupting my sewing. I am disrupting the speed that I was sewing at. And that does not need to happen here. So set up your machine. Thread that machine. Check the stitch length, make sure that it's not gonna pucker that fabric. Just do a little test, you know? If you have an overlocker, make sure you change that thread. You don't wanna do that in between. Do it before you start one stitch into that fabric, okay? And set up your space. Plug in your iron, fill it up, get that water in there. You don't want no dry iron, we want steam, okay? Get your snips, and with little trepidation in your heart, get that seam ripper, because you know, it might happen and you want it handy. You might need a ruler on hand. I do keep a ruler close by when I'm sewing. And of course your sewing instructions. If you can tape them on the wall or put them somewhere where they're not gonna get in the way and you can easily look at them or access them, that is perfection. So set up your space, people. Set up your space. Okay, we are getting to the sewing part, finally. Make sure that you have the right stitch length. If your stitch length is smaller than it needs to be, you're going to actually be sewing slower. You know how quickly that number 5 basting stitch goes? Don't choose a smaller stitch than you need. 12 stitches per inch for a regular, just normal cotton, something like this. For something lighter, you probably want more like 14 to 16 stitches per inch. And then for a heavier fabric, you can do 10 or 8 stitches per inch. So definitely try it out, test it out. Do you want to improve your sewing, learn fashion drawing, business savvy, productivity, or even something completely different? You've come to the right place. You've clicked on the right video, because today I got a little deal for you. I have had the privilege of being with Skillshare for a while now, and I've taken multiple classes from what seems like their endless store of classes. They're an online learning community for creatives like you and me who want to grow in their skills, who want to learn new skills. I've personally been enriched by classes in interior design, graphic design, singing, illustration, productivity, and the list goes on, my friends. My favorite class by far has been this Jordan Gomez class called How to Draw with Your Sewing Machine. Her class is very straightforward, it's fun, there's no frills, and she creates gorgeous designs. So with some trial and error, I was able to make this. The first 1,000 of you to click the link in my description will get a whole month free membership on Skillshare. Or you can use my code Lydia Naomi on the Skillshare website and you can try it out risk-free. Now I refuse to keep you waiting any longer. Let's get into those juicy tips that I have learned along my long career of sewing. Do not finish edges that will be enclosed. It's a waste of time. What I mean by finish edges is overlock or zigzagging edges to keep it from fraying, like we usually do in a garment. If that area of the garment is going to be enclosed in a facing, or it's just not going to be seen in any way, shape, or form, like a waistband, you have no business overlocking or zigzagging. It is a waste of time. Things like armholes, side seams, pocket seams, waist seams, these all need to be overlocked. I mean, unless they are lined. So make sure that you keep that in mind. Batch sewing is your friend. Let me give you an example. This bubble frock has a lining and a shell. I had to gather both the lining and the shell on the front and the back. So that means I had 6 panels to sew. And when you gather, you do a double row of basting stitches. So instead of sewing that basting stitch on one piece and then gathering it, and then doing the next piece and then gathering it, why not just sew all 6 pieces, sew along the top in a row? Because when you sew something over and over, you slowly gain speed. So I recommend that you just sew one type of seam or one type of stitch in as many areas of the dress as you can. Another example is when I was sewing my milkmaid dress. I was enclosing the tops of the many bodice panels and I needed to understitch them too. So instead of sewing one seam on one of the panels and then opening it up and understitching, I sewed all of the seams first and then I opened them up and understitched them all in a row. And that really cuts down on time and bolsters efficiency. Just try it and I think you're gonna find that your life
Will not be the same ever and ever again.
Let's do some chain stitching. There's no need when you're sewing multiple seams on different pieces. You don't need to cut the threads in between those seams. Just let it flow. Keep sewing. Make sure that you backstitch beginning and end, of course, but there's no need to snip those stitches. Some of you might have the privilege of having an auto cut button on your machine. I do have that and it does come in handy, but that doesn't even stop me from chain stitching. I'll click that auto cut button and start right out with that next seam. Don't waste time snipping. We can do that after. Pin sparingly. You don't need to pin a straight seam with like 20 pins. What I would say is pin the top and the bottom and one place in the middle. If there's matching notches, pin there. And then just use your hands and maneuver the fabric as you sew. Now this will come with practice. You may not be advanced enough to reduce the amount of pins on a straight seam like that, but with practice, you will learn this. Sometimes I don't even pin a seam at all because I just know that it fits together. And usually this is with shorter seams. With longer seams, you do need to pin at least once or twice, just so that the seam doesn't end up with one side being longer than the other. What I will say though is that you can go to town with pins when it comes to complex seams. Like, for example, whenever there's gathering incorporated, I use a ton of pins. I don't want the gathers slipping under and getting out of the seam. There's just too much there to risk, so I put a ton of pins in there. When I'm setting in a sleeve, I put a lot of pins in there. I want it to be accurate. Another thing about pinning is if you pin perpendicular to that seam, you can actually sew over the pins and most of the time not hit them because they're perpendicular to the needle and the needle's gonna walk over them. I also find it so much easier to take them out as I go if they are perpendicular to that seam. Perpendicular. Also, I want to mention that this wrist pin tool is amazing because as you sew, and if you want to take out your pins as you sew, you can just stick your pin right back in that wrist tool. It is the best thing ever. I'll link it below for you. Learn your measurements, sister! Because I've been working with inches, we learn inches in fashion school, I can pretty much guess with my eye an eighth, a quarter, a half, 3/8, 5/8-ish, 3/4, and an inch. I generally know up to 3 inches. So sometimes when I'm either ironing or even just finishing a hem by sewing it, I can fold that fabric, say a 1/2 inch by memory. So you can practice this, and if you're ever unsure, you can always just pull out your ruler and you'll just be so much more confident after finding out that you, in fact, were right. Our brains are amazing tools. Utilize tools that will make sewing easier and faster. For example, there's this rolled hem foot. It really comes in handy for finishing the edges of lightweight dresses, and it just gives such a clean finish, and you just feed it in. You roll that fabric and feed it in like a magic, okay? Another great one is a bias tape maker. Great for making shoulder straps, garment ties, anything like that. It's also great for making bias tape. It's definitely easier than doing it manually. Believe me, I've tried it myself. I use this loop pressing bar thing to pull through elastic through channels that I've made. I always get people asking me what it is, where I found it. The brand is called Clover, and they're just a whole bunch of different loop pressing bars, but I use it to pull through elastic, and it's really great. It really makes it easy. Using a knitting needle to push out points in like a collar or anything pointed that you're sewing really helps. I have these bobbin keepers that keep my bobbins from unraveling. It keeps my little sewing compartment in my machine super neat, so I highly recommend getting those. I don't know why I resisted for so long. And then in addition to your seam ripper, you can get a razor, which is really great for doing precision thread cutting. For example, I sewed a buttonhole wrong and I had to take it out. I know, that's a nightmare. But using my razor really helped take it out, and it was so much more precise and didn't pull on the fabric or wreck the fabric. Another great tool is tracing paper or parchment paper. Paper that's kind of lightweight. Putting that under a start of a seam or finish that you're working on that's kind of thick will help move the fabric along under the needle. It's also great for putting under delicate fabric because sometimes your machine wants to chew up delicate fabric, especially at the start of a seam. I actually did a quick short on this, you can check that out. So I always keep a couple pieces of scrap paper beside me so that I can quickly grab that instead of letting the fabric get chewed and having to waste time taking that out or fixing it. I also want to mention a little tip about sewing on buttons. What you want to do is quadruple the thread. So what you do is you get a long piece of thread, you fold it in half, and then you take that loop from folding it in half and put it through the eye of the needle, and then pull that thread to the same length as the tail, and then tie those tails together, and you have 4 strands. And believe me, it speeds up the button sewing process and makes the button so much stronger. Also, I love using cotton thread for that because it just glides through the fabric, less tangles. It's so great. You can save yourself a lot of time just by using the right tools. Okay, this tip might seem dumb and obvious, but one thing I found is that when I listen to an audiobook, music, or a podcast, my focus just stays so much stronger, especially if my energy is draining or I'm just feeling annoyed about the project. Listening to something and kind of distracting myself from those negative feelings really helps me keep up with my sewing flow. Some of you probably do this all the time. I actually have to make myself do this because I do love silence, but sometimes working in silence and then getting frustrated doesn't really help. Sometimes you need something, a little pick-me-up, you know? So put on some upbeat music and get excited, get motivated. I guarantee that you'll be speeding with that garment that you're sewing. So there it is, all my secrets laid bare for you all. You're welcome. I hope that you all become super fast sewers. Make sure you tune into my sewing challenges. I always try to sew a whole bunch of garments in one day or a short period of time. I like to challenge myself, and it's a lot of fun. Thank you guys so much for watching. Like, subscribe, comment, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!